Live from the Newstalk ZB News Centre, this is Newstalk ZB News.
It's 12 midday. I'm Sandy Hodge. The conflict between the US and Iran could resume with both sides unwilling to make concessions to secure a peace deal. A ceasefire is in place between the two countries until Wednesday, with delegates expected to meet in Pakistan. The White House wants a hold on Iran's enriched uranium, while Iranian officials want sanction relief and frozen funds unlocked. Geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller told Francesca Rudkin both parties' demands are unlikely to be agreed upon in the coming days.
The ceasefire is only in place until Wednesday, New Zealand time, and if there is no deal done, there's a real possibility, unfortunately, we could go back to war.
New Zealand's #1 commercial radio station. This is Newstalk ZB News.
It's 1 o'clock. I'm Sandy Hodge. Tensions between the US and Iran are likely to re-escalate with their ceasefire ending next week and the Strait of Hormuz being closed again. Iran has fired at ships attempting to pass the waterway in response to the US naval blockade. Officials are expected to meet again in Pakistan for another round of talks before their ceasefire ends on Wednesday. Geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller says the countries risk more fighting if a peace deal doesn't come soon.
For both sides, they cannot meet their aims on the battlefield, but we could still have another round of conflict and before we end up some kind of settlement.
9:14. Right, so after a short reprieve, the Strait of Hormuz is closed again. Iran has shut the strait overnight, citing breaches of trust from the US during the ceasefire. There are concerns the move may threaten any potential peace deal between the two countries. To discuss, geopolitical analyst Dr. Geoffrey Miller is with me. Good morning, Geoffrey.
Good morning, Francesca.
Okay, so it opened up yesterday, albeit with very few ships passing through, closed again today. Iran has warned they would close it again if the US didn't lift its naval blockade. Were the US ever likely to do that?
Well, I think they should have done, but that's obviously not Donald Trump's view. He wants everything and wants to give up very little in exchange. But it's been a real roller coaster ride, Francesca, over the last 24 to 36 hours. There was a real sense of optimism yesterday. Iran had declared the Strait of Hormuz would be open, and it was actually for a very short period. Up to 12 tankers went through the Strait of Hormuz, which might seem very little, and it is compared with the 140 vessels that were transiting before the war began. But it was actually, I think, the most significant number we've seen since this war all started. But that all changed overnight, as you said, with the Iran declaring now the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and an Indian-flagged vessel was actually fired upon by Iran, really as a show of force. So there's a real war of words going on as well between Iran and the United States. There's a real possibility we could go back to war. The ceasefire is only in place until Tuesday, and so that's Wednesday at New Zealand time. And if there is no deal done by then, there's a real possibility, unfortunately, we could go back to war. So things are not looking the best.
Okay, did you expect the closure would be short-lived, or had you hoped they'd made some progress?
I had really hoped. I mean, as I said, there was, I think, a real sense of optimism yesterday and hope that because the ceasefire was in place with Lebanon, which had been one of the sticking points, that ceasefire was in place between Israel and Lebanon, that things were looking up. There was talk that there was going to be another meeting in Pakistan, perhaps this Monday, between Iran and the United States. The mediator, the Pakistani mediator, the army chief, Asim Munir, had spent 3 days in Tehran working through sticking points with Iran, and it seemed like everything was coming together, that there would be some kind of second meeting and some deal would be done before that ceasefire ends on Tuesday. But I'd say all bets are off now. Donald Trump actually convened a meeting of a Situation Room overnight. So that was all the top brass in the White House, J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, Steve Witkoff, the Special Envoy. Everyone was there, and often these meetings all are about plans for war, so and further escalation. Donald Trump, though, he's promised some news by the end of the day and some signals of where to from here. But we've had so many contradictory statements from Donald Trump over the course of this war. I'm just not sure really if we should read into anything that he comes out with, I think we need to look at actions on the ground really to see where we're heading.
In regards to that potential meeting on Monday, Iran's foreign ministers said that they're not ready for a new round of talks. Donald Trump, of course, maintains, very good conversations. A deal is close, but we have no real idea. Do you think anyone is likely to make a concession here to get a deal done?
Well, I think the obvious concession would be for Donald Trump to remove the blockade of Iran. If Iran is giving up its blockade, and it did yesterday for a short period, the good faith measure in return from Donald Trump would be to stop the US blockade of Iranian ships, and at least until you have those talks and some negotiations are held. But as I said, Donald Trump was just unwilling to reciprocate. And that's why we are, I think, in the position that we are now, where we're looking at further escalation, not de-escalation, not dialogue, not diplomacy, but the potential for resumed conflict. And it's a very depressing situation. It's very disappointing. I still think, though, both sides do deep down realise that they can't resolve their differences on the battlefield. The United States and Iran fought this war for almost 40 days, 5 weeks, and they could not really reach their end goals at war. For the United States, they could not get hold of that enriched uranium by continuing to strike Iran from the air, and they also could not effect regime change. They killed a lot of Iran's top leaders, but they only ended up with the former supreme leader's son, now the new supreme leader, Mustafa Khamenei, who's reportedly a more hardline figure. So if you fail on the battlefield, in the end, I think the only option is the negotiating table. And I think eventually we'll probably get there. But unfortunately, we could end up with another round of escalation and another round of warfare in the middle.
You mentioned the nuclear material there, Jeffrey. How big a sticking point do you think that this is going to be when it comes to getting to an agreement?
Well, I think this is very much the United States' main focus. Because they cannot get regime change, they're focusing on the 440 kilograms of enriched uranium that Iran has, enriched to 60% purity. That's one step away, a technical step away from enrichment to 90%, which would be enough for a nuclear weapon. So the focus is on what to do with that material. In the United States, Donald Trump wants that material to be exported to the United States. And for Iran, that's just a non-starter. They are not going to go for that. So are there compromise positions? Could it be exported to a third country? Could it be down blended to a lower level of purity? That was what happened under the original Iranian nuclear deal from 2015 that Donald Trump tore up in 2018. Would that be acceptable to the United States, to Donald Trump? Probably not. And this is the problem that we have, is that there is a real gulf in the positions between the United States and Iran. It's going to require compromise on both sides. I think that will happen eventually, just because the war hasn't worked effectively for both sides. They cannot meet their aims on the battlefield. But, we could still have another round of conflict and before we end up with some kind of settlement. It's a complicated picture, a slightly depressing picture as we speak.
Look, Jeffrey, you're at least a little bit more positive about the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon.
Yeah, as I say, look, it's a real roller coaster ride. And yesterday it was seeming, I think there was a glimmer of hope. And we saw oil prices go down to $90 a barrel on Friday, which is the lowest point that it's been really since the first week of the war. And New Zealanders will be seeing a slightly lower price at the petrol pumps. I noticed yesterday, the price was just a tick lower than they had been. But we wait to see, when markets reopen on Monday. Donald Trump has a habit of posting good news just before markets open on Monday morning in the United States. So possibly he'll come out with some statement saying, negotiations are back on. We're going to have a meeting in Pakistan. A deal is awaiting. We're going to extend the ceasefire and get a deal done. And then the cycle continues. But right now, we don't have a deal. And the signs are pointing to more escalation rather than de-escalation.
Dr. Jeffrey Miller, thank you so much for your time this morning. Much appreciated.
News you can trust. This is Newstalk ZB News.
It's 7 o'clock. I'm Kay Gregory. A geopolitical analyst says the world is inching closer to a breakthrough in the Middle East. Delegates from the US and Iran are expected to arrive in Pakistan this weekend for talks. In the backdrop, Iran has reclosed the Strait of Hormuz in response to the US naval blockade. The ceasefire in the region earlier in the week almost immediately brought down global oil prices. Analyst Geoffrey Miller says Donald Trump will be hoping to maintain his positive economic trajectory.
That is traffic flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, oil getting to market. It's good news really for everyone, including New Zealand, and it might be just in time for New Zealand in terms of New Zealand's own fuel supplies.
Every view from every angle. This is Newstalk ZB News.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. I'm Kay Gregory. Donald Trump says he may not extend the ceasefire if the deal isn't reached to take hold of Iran's enriched uranium. Iranian officials reject claims that they've already agreed to hand over uranium and are making demands like sanction relief and getting frozen funds unlocked. Geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller says this is why the deal is being brokered by Pakistan.
Ultimately, there has to be a deal that both sides can live with. There has to be a compromise here, and that's really the situation that we have at the moment.